So I had never told Frank that Timmy had a different father than Troy did. I never told anyone. I was so full of shame. I was never gonna tell everyone. I have terrible regrets today because I should have told him from the beginning. It made it very difficult for him when he did finally find out. I'll tell you that in just a minute, how that happened. But I have awful regrets over how I took my anxiety out on my own children. But anyway, one night, my husband had been drinking, and he couldn't believe that I had been married to somebody else and had his children and still didn't love him, and he was letting it drive him crazy when he'd be out on the truck. And so he came home, got drunk, was just so mean to Timmy, and especially Timmy. I had to tell him that Steve isn't even Tim's dad, and it helped. It helped. I never regretted that decision to tell him the truth, because he softened towards Tim and me for a short while. He even agreed to keep it to himself. By the time Shane turned a year old, Frank had gone back to drinking. I tried so hard to be attractive. I stay skinny, and I colored my hair trying to be pretty until it was so damaged that it wouldn't even grow. I mean, I had a full-time job. I kept our house spotless. I actually filled out a missing persons report on my husband twice, because he'd come home off of the truck, but he never came home for days. And I mean, that's just what my life was like. It was miserable, and I didn't know how to think for myself. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to do it. And finally, I went to his mother for advice. We'd been married 5 years by now, and I went to her and spilled my guts, just told her what he was doing. She said, well, I know what I'd do. She said, next time he came home, I'd be gone and make him wonder where I was for a while. And I thought, man, nothing else I have tried has worked. Why not give it a shot? And so the two older boys were with Steve for the weekend. And as soon as my husband came in, I went out. Me and a girlfriend just drove up to my hometown, spent the night with my niece, came back the next day. But I walked into the door, and Frank started just hitting me with his fists in my head, just over and over and over, and screaming accusations at me. And he went ballistic. And I had to go to work the next day, and so I went to bed. I got up at 4 every morning for the job that I had at that time, and had to go to bed early always. And he woke me up on top of me with a pillow, suffocating me, trying to kill me. And he very nearly succeeded. I mean, I weighed 95 pounds at the most, and he went about 250. He was 6 foot tall. And I couldn't breathe. I couldn't get myself free. I thought I was going to pass out. And just at the time that I thought I was breathing my last breath, this thought popped into my head. You know, Jehovah's Witnesses teach that there's no such thing as hell. And this thought said, they lied to you about Armageddon happening 3 years ago in 1975. What if they lied to you about hell? And I thought, if they lied to me about hell, I'm going there right now. And then I thought, I need to find out the truth. And I kid you not, the second that thought went through my head, I need to find out the truth, the pillow came off of my face. My husband fell asleep and never woke up all night. So anyway, I lay there and I thought, I'm getting help tomorrow. I am going to go into work, and I'm not going to hide and pretend. I am getting help. And so this gal named Kathy came into the restroom. She said, you look awful. She said, what's happened to you? And I spilled my guts. And she said, would you like to see my pastor? And I said, you know what? Yes, I would. And so she tried to get me into her pastor, but she couldn't, which I'm thankful for, because instead she got me into a counselor. And that counselor knew how to deal with people who were coming out of cults, because he made me think for myself. He asked me questions. He didn't just sit there and give me answers. He asked me questions and made me think for myself. I had spent my entire life being what I thought people expected me to be. First of all, he showed me a scripture in the Bible, in Ephesians 2:8, where it says, "It's by grace that we're saved through faith, not by works, so that no one can boast." And he said, when you get your paycheck every week, he said, "Is that a gift?" And I'm sitting there thinking, how does he want me to answer this? I wasn't even concerned about what the true answer might be. I was concerned with how he thought I should answer. And it took me a few seconds, and finally something made me go, well, no, it's not a gift. I worked for it. He said, and salvation is not something you work for. It's a gift. And I thought, man, that is just too good. That's just too easy. And I said, that's too easy. But I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to check this out. That night, my husband didn't come home as usual, so I got the kids bathed and in bed early as always. And I went and looked out my patio doors into the night sky. And to me, God was this far away entity. And so I just said, I don't know anything about you, but I am not running from you anymore. I said, I'm yours, and I'm sorry, but I'm not running anymore. The counselor had told me to go home and tell my husband that I was sorry for whatever I did to make him so angry, which I did. It had to be the next day because I didn't see him until a day or two later. I don't remember how long it was, but anyway, I told him I was sorry, and he goes, "It's not you." He said, "It's never been you." He said, "It's me." And I was surprised to know that he knew that. Because I didn't know it. I thought everything was my fault. It always had been. He'd been raised in a Pentecostal family. And so when I told him that I had asked God into my life, he totally knew what I was talking about. It was so foreign to me. I didn't know anything about any of that. Anyway, I didn't even know what to do. The counselor invited me to go to his church. He said, "You can go to any church you want to." He said, "There's lots of good ones." But he said, "You're welcome to come to mine." He told me where he went to church. And so that Sunday I went to a church for the first time. Found out that my husband's sister went there. I didn't know anything about her. And I heard the song Amazing Grace for the first time. And the sermon was all about this God who was love. And it was like I was hearing for the first time in my life what I had longed to hear my whole life, ever since I was a little girl reading that John 3:16 plaque on my mom's wall. And I started to change. I started learning how to be a nice mom. My husband saw the change in me. He started going to church with us. That Easter, I've got pictures of us that Easter. We were still pretty dysfunctional, but at least we dressed up and went to church together. I quit smoking. Things got really hard for me because his family that I worked with quit speaking to me. I think they just didn't know what to do with me. But I tell you what, I was in church every time the doors were open. And oh my gosh, the kids had been going with their dad on the weekends to the Kingdom Hall, and they didn't want to do that anymore once they'd been to church with me, and I didn't make them. I didn't make them go to the Kingdom Hall anymore. They did have to go once in a while because he had visitation. But I tell you what, we went to Sunday school and to church, and I helped in the nursery. I cooked for Sunday night youth group. Went to middle week Bible study and prayer group. We went to large conferences and concerts. Oh my gosh, I loved the Christian music concerts. And but nothing was changing at my house. In fact, if anything, it was worse. My husband was running around on me and drinking nonstop. My first husband, Steve, got remarried and got his new wife converted to be a Jehovah's Witness too. She told Tim that Steve wasn't even really his dad. And it was bad timing. Tim was 14 years old at the time, and he was always such a happy-go-lucky kid. And this one particular Sunday night after the weekend with his dad and his stepmom, he and Troy came in, and Troy was fine, but Tim went to his room and shut the door, and that was just not like Tim. And so I went in. I said, "What's the matter?" He said, I just found out that Steve isn't my dad. I just sobbed and I said, I'm sorry. I said, I was so ashamed. I couldn't tell you. And he said, you're my mom. He said, I'll always love you. And I said, if you want to find your bio dad, I'll help you. He did that about 2 years later. But, you know, during that time, I did all the things that I didn't get to do as a child. I got to do them with my kids. I took tennis lessons. We went roller skating on Saturdays and bowling in the winter and to the beach all the time in the summer, of course. But I still had these ruts of wrong believing. I think the Bible calls those strongholds. But anyway, I believed that I had to submit to my abusive, unfaithful, alcoholic husband because I knew the Bible said that God hated divorce. Now, I know now that he hates divorce because he hates what it does to the family. But it doesn't mean you can't get one when you're living with that kind of dysfunction. I know that now, but I didn't then. And so I stayed there. And I made a very unsafe environment for my boys for years. But I was sure that God would not love me anymore or be on my side anymore if I divorced him. That kind of believing was completely devoted to destroying my children because their lives, they suffered terribly for it. Tim went into drugs and alcohol in his teens. Troy started going bald in high school. Shane got involved in drinking at an extremely young age. It just seemed like my prayers weren't being answered, and I quit going to church. And you know, it was right at the time when I had 3 teenagers, and that is the worst time to get a divorce and quit going to church. And Satan knows it. And I watched my whole family go down the toilet. I had been able to kind of maintain some kind of normal life for everybody by going to church, but not anymore. I traded Wednesday night prayer meeting for an aerobics class. I started running. I started participating in 10Ks. I had never been part of any sport or anything like that, and I was having the time of my life. My husband, he lived a completely separate life than we did. And it kind of became easy to do. Just live separate lives and do that way. But I finally ended up having the courage to file for divorce. And the way it happened was I had been in a 5K run on a Saturday morning. And when I went back home, he still wasn't home. Hadn't been home all night. And Shane was with me. He ran with me. And so I decided to go to a local tavern to see if I could find his car there. Because I'd had it. I was ready to tell him, we're done. And as I pulled up to this tavern, saw his car parked there, and here comes a woman driving up into the parking lot, and Frank was with her in her car. Of course, I confronted him, and he was ugly. And I said, what would you think if you saw me getting out of somebody's car at a tavern after they'd been going all night? And he said, I wouldn't even be surprised. I mean, he was just hateful. And I decided, that did it. I had spent 11 years being a good and faithful wife to an abusive alcoholic, even to be told that. And so I filed for divorce in 1984. And, it wasn't easy. He tried every kind of intimidation. Drove his car through the front window of the house one time in the middle of the night. Ran his fist through I don't know how many walls we had to repair later. Threatened us with guns. I had to take all the guns out of the house in the middle of the night one night. He just beat the kids up. He beat them up. He'd yell at them and profanities at them. And I took the boys and went and stayed with my sister for a while. We had to get away from him. While I was gone there, he brought some other woman into our house. And he totaled our car on the corner that we lived on. It took the jaws of life to get him out, and all the neighbors thought it was me. They went to church that night. The kids had gone on their own, and the neighbors all told them that I was involved in this awful wreck, and it was just a nightmare. But I had to cash all the money that I had saved for years, and I gave him $10 cash, or $10,000 rather, sorry, $10. $10,000 cash in order to keep the house for me and the boys to have someplace decent to live. And we got divorced, and he spent the money on a shiny red sports car. He got married 2 more times before he got sober. Finally got sober for 2 years. He was sober. And then he relapsed for 1 week and shot himself in 2002. And Shane found him. But anyway, I want to tell you how it is that my sister and her husband happened to leave the Jehovah's Witnesses. There had been a huge church in the town where we lived that had turned into a cult. I don't really think it was in the beginning, but it had turned into a cult. People weren't allowed to have doctors. They were not allowed to use birth control. And so lots of babies were being born and people were dying in this little town. And somebody put a write-up in the newspaper, "This describes a cult." And my sister read that newspaper article and she said, "This is the traits of a cult. I'm in a cult." And she and her husband both got out. It was a terribly difficult time to do. I mean, you don't do a thing like that easily, and it caused their divorce. But later, she and her first husband both married non-Jehovah's Witnesses and had pretty normal lives, and their 2 daughters never embraced the Jehovah's Witness belief system as adults, thankfully. And all of my niece's children are out and mentally healthy people. I married Mike in 1986. Mike and I worked together. We met at work, and we'd been friends for years. You know, you have friends of the opposite sex when you work in a factory, and I ran the tool crib for quite a few years, so I had a lot of male friends, and I didn't even know Mike's name for years, but it became very obvious to me during my divorce that Mike was a special, special person in my life. And I'd never known a friend like Mike had been to me. While we dated, he never showed up at the house empty-handed. He'd have 2 sacks of groceries for me and the boys. And he didn't drink. Gave me good advice for my problems. I'd cry on his shoulder, and he'd actually give me helpful advice how to handle things. And we decided to get married, and I wanted to get married in a church. And do you think we could find a pastor to marry us because we'd both been divorced? No way. Which I think is so sad. But we finally did, and that pastor welcomed us with open arms, and I remember standing in his office just sobbing because I felt so unconditionally loved and accepted by him. But it wasn't enough to get me to go back to church, but we got married in a church. Mike had 4 grown daughters, so with my 3 boys, we instantly became a family of 9. And I wish I had the time to tell you of all that happened with all of us, because there was a lot, but I don't. So I'm going to speed forward to 1992. I had never told Mike that I used to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I never told anybody for 15 years. I didn't talk about it. And so after we were married, I told Mike that I had been one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And when Tim, his life got so messed up after he found out that Steve wasn't his dad, and he got wrapped up in the drinking, and it was actually with the church youth group that he did all that stuff. But I went back to church. Mike watched me cry myself to sleep every night for weeks, and he said, "I think we need to find a church." And so we did. We started going to church where the pastor who married us preached, and pretty soon Tim started coming too, and I watched him start trusting God, and he got sober, and oh my gosh, he's 51 years old now, and he's been sober since he was like 21. because he believed God could help him. Because he didn't have that false belief system that I did. And that he did for a little while as a little boy. But in 1992, by now the internet was a thing. And the world was changing fast. And I heard through the internet that there was this Ex-Jehovah's Witness conference in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And, I got so excited. Mike helped me make arrangements, and I actually flew out there all by myself. And this is when I started to heal, because I had never talked about it. And there were over 400 of us there. And I spent 3-4 days with Ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, hearing their stories and talking and crying and laughing. It was wonderful. And I met this whole new family, all from Indiana, and we became fast friends. And Mike and I, when we went back to church, had gotten involved in ministry. Too long of a story to go into, but we had a puppet and clown ministry, and I told you earlier in the video that I gave my clown character the name Misfit because it's how I'd always felt growing up as a Jehovah's Witness. I met lots of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses during the 20 years that Mike and I were clowns, and Christian clowns, mostly in churches. We got to go to all denominations, which was wonderful because I got to see that there isn't just one true denomination or one true building like the Kingdom Hall was supposed to be. I found out that there were good, saved, born-again, spirit-filled Christian people everywhere. And a bunch of them that weren't, too, that were claiming to be. But that's just the way it is in reality, in the real world. There is no flawless perfectness like my mom thought she had to be. But I'm to the end of my story now, and I hope I've got time in this little video to tell you how I finally came to believe that God loved me. It was in the year 2000 on my 50th birthday. But here's what happened. Because we only lived 80 miles away from my hometown, I was able to go back and go to the beach once every year. It was on Lake Michigan. And I'd go by the house I grew up in. I couldn't go visit any of my family up there because they all shunned me. And we'd sold Mom's house. And so I would stand outside my house and look at it and tell the kids, this is where I used to live, this is where I grew up. Wishing all the while that I could go back in. Well, by now, over 25 years had passed since my mom had died. And it was almost like my whole childhood hadn't been real because all these people were gone from my life, and I would cry over it, and I just couldn't seem like I could get over it. And so this one time, I stood outside of my mom's house. I'd knocked on the door, nobody was home. I went next door, they didn't know the people. So I stood there outside the front of my mom's house, and I said a prayer. I said, Lord, if you could get me inside that house just one more time, I sure would appreciate it. And we drove back home the 80 miles, and I literally forgot about it. Well, then in October of 1999, Mike and I took a vacation, and we drove out to Niagara Falls, and then we went to New York City for a bus tour. And I remember touring through, at that time, the Jehovah's Witness headquarters were still in Brooklyn. And as that tour bus went through all those tall buildings of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, I just wept because I could see the reality that I had believed cement buildings to be of God. And it was devastating. It was devastating. Afterwards, we went out to Allentown and attended the Ex-Jehovah's Witness conference. Mike and I together did. And on opening day, what they do is they pass a cordless microphone around and everybody introduces themselves. And a lady down in the front row stood up and she said her name was Nancy and she lived in my hometown. And so when it got to me and I had the microphone, I introduced myself and I said I was Pam and I live in the same town you do, Nancy. And I said, we need to meet, talk, which we did. We had lunch together that day and We didn't know any of the same people. The only reason she was even at the conference is because she helps her son do a newsletter, and he has a ministry to ex-Mormons and ex-Jehovah's Witnesses out of San Antonio. And it was just strange. The whole thing was strange. Well, we exchanged email addresses, parted ways, stayed in contact, talked maybe once a month or so. After that, we stayed in contact, and it was just a few days before my 50th birthday. I was going to turn 50 in April of 2000, and I was emailing my friend Nancy, and I mentioned my address, where the house that I lived in. And because I thought maybe she might have known my sister. She didn't know me, maybe she knew my sister. I had gone away somewhere, and when I got back, Mike said, have you read your email? And I said, no. He said, you got one from Nancy. And so I read it, and her aunt and uncle lived in my mom's house. But it was for sale, and they would be moving soon. But they would love to have me come for a visit. I was ecstatic. And we made arrangements to go right away that weekend, the weekend of my 50th birthday. And we drove up there to my hometown, and God answered that prayer to get to go back inside of my mom's house. And the timing was really significant, because not only had I never remembered ever being allowed to celebrate a birthday in that house, it was while I lived in that house that I believed with everything in me that I would never be allowed to live beyond 25 years old. 1975 is when I turned 25, and I was completely convinced that I would be dead at 25. Mike and I sat there in the living room visiting with Nancy's aunt and uncle, and I sensed somebody's thoughts coming into my thoughts. And it was this: maybe they never celebrated that you were born, Pam, but I always did. And I made up my mind I wasn't going to cry, because this was a joyous day and I didn't want to ruin it with tears. But for the first time, I believed God loved me, and I've never doubted it since. I'd been so convinced that he'd destroy me. And here I was, 50 years old, sitting in my mom's living room, hearing him in my thoughts. The house sold within a month, and Nancy's aunt and uncle moved away. Nancy moved away to Texas, and I'm just still in awe of how it all happened. And I call it my miracle, because it changed me forever. 2 years later, my job was eliminated, and I was able to retire at the age of 52. I took a face painting class and started doing face painting as a clown at birthday parties. And I thought, how like my wonderful Heavenly Father is that he took the little girl who was never allowed to celebrate a birthday and turned her into a birthday party clown. Today, I just love him more than life itself. Thank you for watching.